Okay, so we are almost to the end of this business. First thing that I would like to cover is we're going to talk about the divisions, the subdivisions of the autonomic nervous system. We just don't have time to do it all, both in terms of my talking to you, your reading, as well as test time, quiz time. But we're going to focus on what I hope to be most helpful for you as you go forward with whatever it is you're going to do. So I pull up a whiteboard here, and I'm just going to quickly, this is review, a quick review. You know that sensory information comes into the nervous system. I'm just reiterating this. Goes to the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. That's the sensory afferent pathway in the peripheral nervous system. Brain and spinal cord do the processing and send out a command via the motor efferent system. And that motor efferent system can be divided into the voluntary somatic division that innervates voluntary skeletal muscles, or that motor efferent division can also be subdivided down to the autonomic, which is where we are at the end of this. The autonomic nervous system, they call it. It's really just a subdivision of the overall nervous system. And this is what we're going to focus on today, is the autonomic that can be further subdivided into parasympathetic and sympathetic. So the first thing I'm going to do, this is where we are. And the first thing I'm going to do is sort of clarify the overall general functions of these two subdivisions, of this subdivision. I know it sounds repetitive and redundant. So let's do that. So on a new board, I'm just going to write, these are general functions of these two subdivisions of the autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is known, and I've said this in the past, I'm just going to reiterate, as the rest and digest function of our nervous system, because that's a great way to remember it, and all textbooks label it this way, and you'll see why as I detail the functions. So first thing I'm going to say is specific functions, and just, this is not an all-encompassing list. These are the major examples. This subdivision is in charge of or regulating the digestion of our food. It also decreases, so I'm writing an arrow going down, it decreases blood pressure. It's in charge of or regulates elimination functions. That means elimination of undigested food, feces, as well as elimination of, I'm going to put an and sign, and urine. So what we need to eliminate are waste products that we get out of the body in terms of feces and urine. It also decreases breathing rate. You can see why now it's called rest and digest. It decreases heart rate. When you study the cardiovascular system in A&P2, you'll find out that the heart, the human heart, and the mammalian heart, they want to naturally beat at a higher rate. And it's the activities of parasympathetic innervation that actually dampen or decrease our heart rate to a resting rate. So it also, I'm just going to put regulates. In general, it regulates genital function. Not just, that's supposed to be a C, not just in elimination of urine, but also sex organ function as well. Now, I'm going to compare that to sympathetic functions. So the sympathetic nervous system is known as the fight or flight system. The reason it was given this name, and all textbooks call it this, is this subdivision of the nervous system evolutionarily is designed to save our lives. It sets off all sorts of life-saving mechanisms when we are truly stressed. That's sort of its evolutionary derivation, but it also ignites things like in our body when we vigorously exercise, for example. So let's just list some of the functions of this one like we did up above with the parasympathetic. So this, first thing I'm going to do before I make a list is, so that I don't forget to say this, that's why I'm sort of interrupting here myself. These two subdivisions innervate basically the same organs in the body. I'm going to put, they just have opposite effects. So we're going to look at the anatomy of where the nerves come from and where they go and how they're arranged in a minute. But this is important to always remember. The parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions, they innervate, meaning the nerves go from the central nervous system to basically the same group of organs in the human body, and they just have pretty much opposite effects. So now we can make our list. The sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate. That's an opposite effect. It also increases breathing rate. It dilates pupils, and I just didn't write that up above. The opposite effect would occur. This one constricts pupils. Just to be consistent in showing you that these two subdivisions innervate the exact same organs. It also constricts blood vessels. I'm going to put blood vessels, and therefore I'm going to put /flow to visceral organs, and shunts blood elsewhere, particularly to skeletal muscles. So hence, just to remind you, the fight or flight title that we give it, say a fire alarm goes off in a building that you're working in and you're up on the 10th floor, when you're just sitting there relaxing, all of us, the parasympathetic nervous system is sort of a maintenance type of subdivision. This is what's going on in our bodies most of every day. But when, say, a fire alarm, in our example, a fire alarm goes off, this system, the sympathetic nervous system, overrides this one. So our sympathetic nervous system is not in play most of every day, but when it does, when it does click on, it just overrides almost all of these functions and has opposite effects on organs. So you need blood to run out of a burning building in your skeletal muscles, your legs and your arms. So I'm going to list a few more of these examples. It also increases, just to be consistent, it increases blood pressure. It also increases blood to the heart. I'm going to write dilates bronchioles. Those are our air passageways to allow for more oxygen to get into our system and therefore get more oxygen to our active skeletal muscles. Here's an important one. The sympathetic nervous system stimulates the liver to break down glycogen stores. I'm going to put to release glucose into the blood, and that comes from stored glucose, which is called glycogen. So the liver stores glucose, sugar, in the form of glycogen. And don't worry about that so much. It's just it hooks a bunch of glucose molecules together, links them together. And when our body needs that fuel source, the liver has the ability to break that stored glycogen apart and release it as glucose into the bloodstream. All right, so Kayla, I'm just going to, if you want to record this, oops, I'm not getting a record on yours, so you might be on a phone or something. But I'm recording this, so don't worry. All right, so those are the basic differences between parasympathetic and sympathetic in terms of their function, what they do, their overall functions. And remember, the sympathetic is rarely turned on in our system. Not that it never is, but it rarely is. And when it does turn on, it completely overrides the function of the parasympathetic. Now, this is a great thing, the sympathetic nervous system, in terms of saving our lives. It also, in terms of vigorous exercise, it clicks on and does all sorts of things. However, that's great in the short term. It's not so great in the long term. So stress, both physical and emotional stress, causes the sympathetic nervous system to turn on. And that's why long-term stress can be hard on the body. All of these things that I've listed over here are great when we need to run out of a burning building or fight or run for our lives. These things, though, if they're turned on over the course of long periods, are very stressful for the body and hard on organ systems, vital organs. So we have found over time, if somebody's very stressed out on a day-to-day basis, say in the job that they work at or in a relationship that they're in, emotional stress can turn a lot of these things on. Even if it not at full blast, they turn these what we call stressors on, and if they're turned on for a long period of time, that presents problems to things like the cardiovascular system, increases blood pressure, increases chances of stroke, heart attack, things like that. So just remember, the sympathetic nervous system is great in the short term for short-term blasts of fight or flight, not so good if it's turned on over the course of weeks and months and even years. Now we're going to look at the anatomical differences between the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. So let's go to a new whiteboard. And I'm going to write anatomical comparison. I think this is 14.2 in your book. And the first thing is parasympathetic fibers originate in the cranial and I'm going to write in parentheses, brainstem, and sacral regions of the spinal cord, okay? And the sympathetic fibers, I'll draw a picture in a minute. Parasympathetic, I misspelled that one, sorry. Parasympathetic fibers originate in cranial and sacral regions. Sympathetic fibers originate in the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord. Okay, so I'm going to draw some pictures based on the anatomy of this business. I'm not going to get as detailed as the diagrams in your book. I want you just to understand the basic differences. So I'm just going to write parasympathetic versus sympathetic. And I'm going to draw a brain, a human brain. This would be anterior, front, posterior, back. Here's the cerebellum down here. Here's the brain stem. And the spinal cord, it's not perfectly straight. It actually makes sort of an S-shaped structure. And I'll do one over on this side as a comparison. So we've just said in words and verbal context that the parasympathetic fibers, I'm going to use different colors, originate up here from this region and way down here. That means the nerves of the parasympathetic system originate in this region of the brain stem and this region of the spinal cord down here. I'm not going to draw each and every organ that these innervate. I'm just going to give some examples. So there's also a major, the vagus nerve, that long one that comes all the way down and innervates our visceral organs. Does something like this. These little Y's that I'm drawing off of these fibers are the ganglia that we talked about the last time, the synapses with that. Remember, all of these innervations, it's a two-chain process or pathway. So we need two nerves, unlike the somatic pathway that just basically regulates everything with a one-chain process. The autonomic nervous system regulates with a two-chain process. And this would just be going to stuff like the eyes and salivary glands. And all of these down here are innervating things in our, like, first would be like the heart, the lungs. I'm not going to write all of them. These are just examples. And then in our viscera, in our abdominal cavity, things like the stomach, pancreas, our digestive organs, liver, gallbladder, and then the urinary bladder, and the genitals, both male and female, would come off of this sacral region. Now, the sympathetic originates from, I'll use a different color, from the thoracic, which is our chest, the thoracic and lumbar, which is our lower back, from this region right here. Sort of the middle portion where the parasympathetic does not originate from. And these fibers, guess what? They innervate this basically all of the same organs. So it would be things like the eyes, the skin, the salivary glands, lungs, heart, stomach, liver, digestive organs, pancreas, adrenal gland, all the way down to, and these bottom ones then would also innervate the urinary bladder and the genitals. The anatomical, so they innervate the exact same organs, but they have basically opposite effects. Now, what we're going to pay most attention to is this first run. I'm back over here at the parasympathetic diagram. These preganglionic fibers, so the fiber that is the first part of the two-part chain is what I have drawn. They're very long. The preganglionic fibers are very long, and then the postganglionic fibers are very short that run to the effector organ. So that's what I'm trying to compare now. So the first thing that we compared was where they originate from. The cranial region of the brainstem and the sacral region down here of the spinal cord. And the first comparison was the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord over here. Now what I'm drawing is this chain, this two-part chain, there's also a difference to recognize. In the parasympathetic system, the preganglionic fibers are very long and the postganglionic fibers are very short. And it's the complete opposite over here on the sympathetic nervous system. The preganglionic fibers are very short. The postganglionic fibers tend to be very long. So in the sympathetic nervous system, the ganglia, that synapse, the connection point between this two-part chain is close to the spinal cord. The ganglia are close to the spinal cord in the sympathetic, and the postganglionic fibers are very long, and it's the opposite over on your left-hand side. The preganglionic fibers are very long in the parasympathetic, and the postganglionic fibers, the ganglia, that connection point, is close to the effector organ over here, and the postganglionic fibers are very short. So I'm going to write this all out in word form now. I'll try to do it down the center of this diagram. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to make a mess. So I'll leave this up here, and I'm going to just layer on top of this. If you need me to go back, just ask, no problem. So I'm just going to write now in word format this comparison of parasympathetic versus sympathetic. And this will hopefully be a simple way for you to compare the two, both pictorially in the diagram that I drew and in word format. So in the para, I'm going to write fibers originate in the brainstem and sacrum. It's really the sacral region of the spinal cord. Second characteristic worth noting is preganglionic fibers are very long. Third, postganglionic fibers are short. And fourth, the ganglia, that means that synapse between the first fiber in the two-part chain and the second fiber in the two-part chain are in or very near the effector organ. And so it's just going to be the opposite over here. The fibers originate in the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord. Two, we're just going to write the opposite. Preganglionic fibers are short. Postganglionic fibers are long. And finally, the ganglia are close to the spinal cord. This will help you, especially on the last quiz next Monday, organize this in a very concise and neat fashion. So, Kayla, I've clicked you're allowed to record. If you want to do that, that's fine. But I'm recording this too, so I'll post it later today. So I'm going to just flip back to this business. We started here with the differences between their functions. Definitely focus on all of those things. Then we went to what we've just written again, the basic anatomical comparison. Then I drew this picture, which will help you remember everything in word format, parasympathetic versus sympathetic in terms of their origination of preganglionic fibers, as well as the location of the ganglia. And finally, I do want you to not forget that they innervate same organs. We stated that at the beginning. They just have opposite effects on those organs. All right, now I'm going to quickly jump to, I know that we're completely switching gears here. I'm going to quickly jump to the endocrine system. Everything that I'm talking about today is going to be on the last quiz, not today's quiz, obviously. So I do want to spend the rest of today and all of tomorrow's Zoom lecture on the endocrine system. So I'm going to call up a whole new platform here for me to write some things out for you. So I'm calling up a new whiteboard and we're starting a new system. We're going to learn some general characteristics about the endocrine system, the organs, and also the two different types of hormone classes based on their chemical shape. So first, whenever you see this word endocrine, think of hormones. So the endocrine system regulates body functions via hormones, which hormones are just chemical messengers that basically use the cardiovascular system, the bloodstream, to travel. And so an endocrine gland secretes a hormone, which is they're tiny, really small chemical messenger that then is secreted into the blood. And then that hormone basically travels everywhere the blood goes. So it goes all over the body, everywhere that blood is circulating. And when it finds its target site, it binds to it. So it regulates body functions via hormones. It is relatively slow acting, especially compared to the nervous system. So anatomists and physiologists always say that the nervous system regulates body functions in the immediate, right now, in milliseconds. The endocrine system regulates body functions over the course of hours, days, weeks, even months, or years, as a matter of fact. So it's relatively slow acting compared to the nervous system. So the lag period of the actions of these hormones can be very long. Also has very widespread and diverse effects. It affects our reproductive system, our water balance. This is all listed in your book. Can help with immune functions and body defenses, as well as, growth and development of physical growth in the human body, as well as organ growth. So it's too all-encompassing to go into every little function that these hormones have, and we're not even going to get there. I'm more interested that you learn the basic major endocrine glands in the human body. Before we do that, I'm just going to reiterate exocrine versus endocrine. When we studied glands in general back the first or second week, we defined an exocrine gland as a gland that the cells secrete usually some sort of a fluid into a specific duct that releases that fluid onto some sort of membrane or organ surface. An endocrine gland is a gland that secretes, I just defined it up above, hormones that travel, chemical messengers that use the blood to circulate everywhere in the human body until they find their target site and then they bind to it. So these endocrine glands are considered ductless. Duct just means a tube. These are ductless glands because the secretions just enter the body fluids, make their way to the blood where they circulate. Two words that I might bring up on a quiz just to expect you to know what this word means: autocrine and paracrine. An autocrine is a description of a gland that secretes a hormone-like substance. So I'm going to put chemical messenger that affects the same cell that secreted it. That's hence the term auto. That has its effects on the same cell that secreted it. A paracrine gland is also like an endocrine gland. It's a gland that secretes a chemical messenger that doesn't need to enter the bloodstream, that affects neighboring cells very close to it. So it doesn't affect exactly the same cell that secreted it, but it affects a cell that's right next to it. Now, I'm going to just quickly, this is the last thing of the day and we'll be done. The chemical structure what some books and what I call classes of hormones. There's two main classes of hormones based on chemical structure. And the first class of hormones are called amino acid based. So these hormones, I forgot to write that, hormone. This class of hormones uses amino acids as its building block to make the hormone. And you know something else that does too, which is protein. So when I was in graduate school, sometimes we would toss these terms around loosely, but we call them protein hormones or protein-based hormones. That's not completely accurate. Amino acid is a better description because an amino acid-based hormone can be very small and just say be 2 or 3 amino acids linked together, or it can be longer. We call that a peptide hormone because a peptide is just a long chain of amino acids. or it can be super long and fold back on itself. And that, when it's actually a protein, that's when it truly is a protein-based hormone. But all three of those examples are amino acid based. These are the most common type of hormone in the human body. So I'm going to put most common class based on chemical structure. And they are also water soluble. That's going to be important when tomorrow I describe to you how these two hormones behave when they get to their target site. These are water soluble plasma membranes of cells. I'll bring this up again tomorrow, but it's worth iterating twice because it's going to be important to understand how they behave. Plasma membranes of cells are lipid-based. Okay? Now we're going to compare that to the second class, chemical structural class of hormones, and those are steroids. And I know that you've heard that word a million times. These are based, they're cholesterol based. So they're derived from cholesterol, and they tend not to be these long chains of amino acids or chemical structure. They tend to be ring shaped. You don't even have, I'm not going to test you on this part, but cholesterol tends to have several rings linked together of lipids like this. They're carbon based, but they use cholesterol as their basis. These are the two main classes that we're going to talk about. There are sort of exceptions to this rule when we classify hormones based on chemical structure. And I'm just going to name those and define those for you really quickly. So they're not part of number 1 or 2 strictly. I'm just going to put exceptions, meaning they don't fall in the class of amino acid based or steroid based. This word is pronounced eicosanoids, and it's eicosanoid. Eicosanoids. These are leukotrienes and prostaglandins. Leukotrienes are basically just chemicals, signaling chemicals that are involved in allergic reactions or some sort of inflammation process. I'm just going to write chemicals. They're signaling chemicals, which is why we mention them in the hormone context. I'll write signaling out here. Signaling chemicals involved in the body response, the immune response of inflammation and allergic reactions. Prostaglandins are much more complicated. That's a whole class of chemicals, and they do so many different things. They affect, I'm just going to give you some of the same ones that your book gives. They increase blood pressure. During child labor, they enhance uterine contractions. That's mediated by a hormone, mostly called oxytocin, but they compound with the effects of oxytocin to increase uterine contractions during childbirth and labor. Prostaglandins are also involved in, believe it or not, pain. When we feel pain in the inside of us, in the body. That's oftentimes the result of certain prostaglandins being released. So, for example, a lot of the medications we take for pain, like aspirin, for example, I know very few people take aspirin anymore. They mostly take anti-inflammatories, but that's a prostaglandin blocker. So prostaglandins actually cause pain when they're released. Certain ones do. And I'm just going to write hemostasis or blood clotting. So these eicosanoids generally act as autocrines and paracrines. And now we know what those two words mean. So I've just started to touch on the endocrine system, what it does, how it's defined, and then we, sorry about that, we went to the two classes of hormones, amino acid base versus steroids, and then I talked a little bit about exceptions to that rule, which are eicosanoids, particularly leukotrienes and prostaglandins, and therefore I'm not going to talk about these anymore after today. Tomorrow, pretty much our sole function is going to be on how these hormones behave when they get to their target site versus these hormones. And there's a significant difference between those two. So I'm done for the day, guys. Nice, short, quick lecture. I'm going to cut my recording. I'll post it later today. So let me stop that.